Welcome to the Talent Development Hot Seat, a show where I interview business executives, talent development professionals, and thought leaders to find out what has been successful and challenging in the world of talent development. My objective is to share ideas, valuable lessons, tools, advice, and trends. My hope is that all of this will ultimately help you, the listener, expand your knowledge, grow your career, and accelerate your success as a talent development professional. Hey everybody, welcome back to another episode of the Talent Development Hot Seat. I am your host, Andy Storch, and I am so excited that you are joining me today for an interview with Larry McAlister. And Larry is a strategic senior leader in global HR management with proven success with multi-billion-dollar businesses such as Equinix, Citibank, and Philips Electronics, as well as dynamic software companies like Tibco and Glue Mobile to deliver highly effective talent management and organizational development strategies. Over his career, Larry has developed some comprehensive development programs to instill strong corporate values and foster high-level competencies. He is known for his exceptional ability to work with cross-functional leaders to guide HR and business integration for global mergers and acquisitions, among other things. Currently, Larry is the Vice President of Global Talent at NetApp, an IT services company that provides a full range of hybrid cloud data services with $6 billion in revenue and over 10,000 employees. And in this newly created global talent role, Larry is focused on ensuring the people strategy closely aligns with the business strategy, which is something that I am very passionate about and love to talk about on this podcast. So I'm excited to get into that. Larry, welcome to the Talent Development Hot Seat.
Thank you, Andy. Appreciate the invite. I'm glad to spend some time with you to chat today.
Yeah, really great to have you on. And I want to say that in conducting over 70 interviews now, I think that this is the most serious that anyone has taken this as far as going to the studio on campus, setting up the sound with the IT crew on hand to make sure the video and sound is as high quality as possible. And so I just really appreciate your approach.
Sure. Well, I think we both run the pressure here to match up to the quality of what we're doing here.
Yeah, exactly. We better make sure this is a great experience. So let's dig into that. And I read some of your bio there, but I'd love for you to share a little bit more of your background, where you came from and how you got to where you are today.
Yeah, so I had a varied background when I came out of college. I was a sports journalism major. I wrote for the LA Times for a while, then became a mutual fund broker, worked for NASDAQ, then worked for operations and customer service. So I had a varied business background and then got recruited to be a recruiter at Citibank, and then added on different elements of HR until I started running HR for some tech companies in Silicon Valley. And the big shift was moving to just the talent side and double down focus on just talent and how to build talent in an organization.
Man, that is a quick overview of a career where I know you've done a lot of different things. I want to go back to the sports journalism part. Maybe I'm just intrigued by that because I used to live in LA and read the LA Times every day, and because my wife is a journalist as well. But is there any part of that part of your background that has been helpful to you in your career, the rest of your career?
Yeah, two things. One is you have to be the best possible listener you can to be able to get the right story and really tell it in an authentic way. And the second is you have to be a storyteller. And I think, a lot of what's missing in leadership development is being able to tell a story of why we're learning and why we're growing and what it matters. Less on the process and more on the story and authenticity.
Tell me more about the listening part. I mean, I know this as a longtime consultant that, you've got to be able to ask great questions and listen to what people care about. But tell me how that has served you well in talent development.
Yeah, I think some of the old school HR focus is really on, I know what I want to deliver and I'm going to deliver it to you. And really it's got to shift to what does the business really need? Interpret that with your experiences and be able to bring back to them a solve for their needs. And I think it's more ears and less mouth for the first, couple of engagements. So that was something I got trained very early in my career.
Yeah, I've said this many times when I interview talent leaders. I always ask about the biggest mistake they made, and the most common one is I just produce something without really listening and asking the right questions to figure out what are they really trying to drive, and what is the impact of that going to be.
No, that's exactly right. I remember I built this training when I was really young in my career. My first director job I ever had. Yeah. I was so proud of it. And I brought it to the leadership team, and they're what is this?
Right.
Why are you bringing this to me?
Yeah.
So I learned at that moment that you should always have seasoned, credible, and skeptical leaders on your side as you're building anything, because then they become the voice of the business, they become the voice of the solution, and it's never just you spinning. You're hurting the leadership to deliver for them.
Yeah, seasoned, credible, and skeptical leaders. And I know what you're talking about, having built and run talent development programs myself over the years. There are some skeptics in the room, and if you don't get them involved in the process or get them on board, then it's so easy for them to come in at the end and say, oh yeah, this is garbage. I don't support this at all, right?
That's right. I mean, I think leaders don't realize the power they have. You could have the CEO standing on a stage talking about a strategy, and the manager turns around to say something to their employee like, this is not real.
Right.
And it's gone immediately, right? That one prick of the balloon blows up the whole story. So getting the skeptics on early is key.
Yeah. And one of my favorite, I've seen this moment happen a couple of times where the skeptic is involved in the creation, right? The co-development of the program. And then maybe they tune out a little bit, and then they come to the end and try to be critical. And you're like, yeah, but you were on the steering committee.
Exactly.
So you really should have voiced your opinion back then. And that kind of like shuts them up at that point, right? There's not much.
Right. Or knowing at the end of this, you're going to be on stage with me talking about it, or you're going to be in the big meeting helping me describe it. So getting the future hook to pull them back in, I think is helpful as well.
Speaking of that and getting executives involved, one of the benefits over the years when I was working at BTS, what I'm doing now, is that when we can get executives involved in co-developing a solution, I find that there's often this benefit of stealth alignment where they may not have been really aligned on a strategy or a concept before that they want to bring to the population. But by getting them involved and getting them to agree that they have to become aligned on it before you can push it out to the masses.
Yeah, that's a really good point. I think a lot of times they're a little bit unconscious of what HR can actually do. So they're used to process, mandatory, following rules, as opposed to taking all that stuff out and saying, what's the most powerful, quick, and easy way to get our leaders or our talent aligned to what we're doing here? And I think it's an education process of results as opposed to delivering some program.
Right. So you mentioned earlier the shift from delivering to really listening and connecting to what the business really needs. And I know in your bio, you talk about connecting, learning back to the business strategy, which is something I'm really passionate about as well. So can you talk a little bit more about the importance of that and how you approach that?
Yeah, I'll just give you a couple of different examples. Sure. A lot of times when you talk about a leadership or what's a VP, you put a list of leadership competencies together, or you say they need EQ and IQ and all these sort of buzzwords that really could be used for any VP in any company ever. My job is to get the leadership team to say, what does it mean to be a successful VP here for the next 2 years? What's the business they need to be running or understanding? What's the impact? Like narrowing it down all the way to what it matters here, not just a theory about what a vice president is. So those kind of conversations in a collaborative way, where you have true, authentic, pointed dialogue about this is what it is and this is what it isn't, really starts getting people focused to delivering on the strategy and less on a definition that could be used anywhere.
So for other HR talent development people who are listening and they come from a really pure HR background, what's the best way to get more familiar with the company strategy to really start to cater more towards that versus just doing, hey, let's increase EQ or whatever it is?
Yeah, well, so understanding the strategy is when I interview people to come work for us in HR, I ask them if they've listened to the earnings report. Did you go back and listen to the earnings report? Did you read the proxy? Do you understand, did you look at our stock price and what's driving it? There's a lot of stuff before you even started a company that you can learn about. And on those earnings calls, it's the reality of what this business is trying to do. And then when you come in for an interview, your question should be starting with what's your need? Where's the business going? Where do you see the business in 3 years? What are the gaps? You're a business person. I want everyone in the company to feel like they're part of the business and not just in their little silo.
Yeah, so it sounds like what you're saying is, hey, if you're coming to interview with me and for an HR or talent development role, it's kind of a given that you care about people and their development, but show me that you care about the business, you understand how a business works.
That's exactly right. One of my first questions is always, hey, how do you immediately start building credibility with a leader? And the ones who are smart say, I start asking them about the business. I start understanding what their pain is. I start understanding what their team's feeling before I even do any, analysis on my side. So that's really the best place to start.
Awesome. I know you are big on building a great company culture, and you're pretty new into your role now at NetApp. So I'm sure this is something you're paying a lot of attention to. So tell me a little bit more about your approach to culture.
Yeah. So tell me if you've been in this situation. I'm sure there's other talent development leaders. You show up, the execs say, hey, we really need to repackage the culture and sell it back to the employees so they believe it's better. We're not
Yeah,
going to do anything
totally.
to make it better, but
Right.
we're just going to put a
But we
whole
need them to
marketing
believe, we
campaign
need
out.
them to believe it. Perception is
And
reality, right?
right, yeah, just let's get posters and let's send out puts, on your badges, and that is the most inauthentic way that you can
Mm,
define your culture. There's two or three ways to do it. One is you get a consultant in and you just talk about words that you like and market it. Another one is you go down into the organization and ask them what they think and bring it back up. What I found the best is to start at the top, because the actions of the top leaders, if that's not aligned and demonstrative of what the culture is, you are just doing a marketing campaign. So what I've seen really work is you get that in a very one or two sort of pithy words around some of the values, and then bring it to the employee base and say, hey, is this resonating? Can you have stories that tell us about this? What's the best way that we can demonstrate this? And then never make a poster, never put it on your badge. Start baking it into everything that you do. How do you interview for this? How do you evaluate for this? How do you recognize each other for this? How do you make sure that this is part of the language? If it's not part of the language every day, it just becomes stale, and you're doing it again in 2 more years.
yeah, that language every day, people say culture is what people talk about when you're not around, right? When you're not looking,
Yeah.
right? So what conversations are they having? What are they saying? And you're saying that it's so important to drive that from the top, right? The senior leaders have to be bought in, just like our discussion about the skeptics. So what sort of things do you do to get the buy-in from the senior leaders to really make sure that they are aligned and you shift the mindset to be aligned to the culture?
Yeah, so I think a lot of people either know they're in a good culture or a bad culture. And most of the companies feel, hey, this is an actually pretty good culture. And I'm saying we need to define it so it doesn't get diluted as we grow. It doesn't get stale and disappear, and lose our competitive advantage of what a culture can do in an organization. So tying it to what the business results are, there's tons of research that shows great cultures where people talk about it and live it have higher business results. And getting especially the CEO, the chief, that's really the chief officer of the culture, for that person to really believe, like, I think this is a powerful way to keep our employees engaged and growing, and understanding what it's like to work here.
Right. Part of the culture is, how bureaucratic are things? How easy is it to make decisions? How much red tape, and can people move agile, or do they have to go through all this red tape? Like I said, I know you mentioned to me right before we started recording that one thing that you're big on right now is removing that noise between the manager and the employee, so that people can get their jobs done easier, better. Tell me more about your approach there.
Yeah. So in my history, HR, legal, finance, we have just given up on the manager. We have just given up on them.
Mm.
They can't do anything around people. Let them do their jobs, hold their meetings. And I just think that's not true. I think managers will go to the level of responsibility that you allow them to go to. So we've done a lot of work, right, in the old times, saying you have to rank everyone and rate them and put them in a number and fill out these long forms and have mandatory trainings and mandatory meetings. And what you're doing is teaching managers to be form filler outers and numbers people around humans. And that is the most dehumanizing relationship you can possibly have, where a manager can hide behind a number and say, I would have given you a higher score, but they told me I couldn't, right? You have broken trust immediately. So we've tried to rip out everything in the way of the manager and the employee and replace it with an idea of how do we grow together? Let's look at the landscape of talent as the most important thing we do here. And what can we do thematically to help grow people? You know, you should be talking quarterly about their future and their alignment and giving you quick pulse results every couple of months that lets you know what you could be working on. Pick one thing to work on. I don't want my managers to be data analysts. I don't want them to be form filler outers. I want them to have the responsibility and accountability that will help you do these conversations, will help you focus on what's important, but just do it. And we've seen massive engagement improvement when you're able to do that.
Oh, that's huge. I mean, as I've been studying this, qualitatively having conversations with talent leaders around the country over the last year or more, I find that, that is the most critical component in conversations that managers are having with their employees. Culture is defined by that. Engagement is defined by that. I've heard the old adage that, people join a company and leave a manager. And, finding more and more as times change, people care more and more about career development, career direction, where are they going? And if they're not getting that conversation from their manager, eventually they're going to go somewhere else, right?
Absolutely. And if you're forcing your manager to get in these really difficult conversations that are out of their control, as opposed to giving them tools to talk about someone's future and alignment and engagement, it just changes the whole dynamic. We got to get away from mandatory things. We have to get away from forcing people to do stuff that doesn't make sense and make it easy for them to want to lean into these kind of conversations.
Yeah. So Larry, what kind of development programs, if any, are you putting in place to give your managers the capabilities to have the right conversations?
So I sort of believe at the very beginning, doing just leadership development, off the shelf leadership development. And you guys know this at BTS, right? Yeah. The idea of you should be teaching people what to do to be successful here and now. So if we're saying you should be doing these quarterly conversations on growth, we're going to give you a bunch of experiences, trainings, tools, so you can have those. And then your manager's having those with you, and everyone in the company's having them. They're all doing it the same way. We'll show you videos of that. And then if you're doing quick surveys, what's the easiest way to take this survey data, share it with your team, build on it? So what you were training you in leadership development is how do you be successful with the tools here? Another big one when you talked about aligning talent with the strategy is we did a business school. Do you really understand how this business works? Do you understand how our customers look at us? Have the person who talks to the investors come in and say, this is what the street asks us and this is what matters. I think by not doing that, you're missing this giant opportunity for people to care about what the business means. When you have the all hands meeting, they really care about what you're saying. And that alignment happens by trusting anyone in the organization to get that kind of information.
Yeah, they're really listening. And one thing I've learned, and this came from research that came out of BTS, is that leadership is highly contextual, right? It's different in every organization. You've worked in different companies. You know that it's very different at NetApp than it was at, Chase or even at Equinix. And so you've got to cater to that when you're setting these programs up.
Exactly right. And what I loved about BTS is you're doing a business experience about your business.
Right.
I mean, that's just how much more powerful can that be?
Yeah, well, I love it and still represent those solutions. And I do think it can be that much more effective, but I'm glad that you're giving people a chance, no matter what it is, to practice what you want them to do and not just preach, the town hall, hey, go do this, and then trust that they're going to go do it, but give them a chance to discover, to practice it, to experience it, and we can really reinforce that learning.
Yeah, we had just an HR all hands once, and I invited the investor relations person to come in and just talk about how they set up earnings calls, what's the street after, what does it really mean? And that was the highest rated guest speaker we had in the 5 years that we had offsite. It's like, I never knew I could be allowed this information.
Yeah.
And wow, how cool is it to know this? And now I'm on the earnings calls and I'm caring about the business. And I think those kind of little things, she loved to come in and do it. We'd love to hear it. It was just so easy to turn people's minds around that you really are a business person.
Interesting. Yeah. One of my clients right now, what they've started doing is after the earnings call, they have an internal podcast and they'll have the CEO and the CFO on to answer some questions that might be on the minds of the employees to really translate, hey, what's going on? How does it affect us at this company? And I mean, from my perspective, I think that goes a long way to building credibility and getting more people engaged and involved in what's going on in the public market.
Right. Like you're part of it. You should understand it for sure.
Yep. So I want to switch gears and ask you a few of my standard questions here, which is what's been your proudest moment or proudest accomplishment in your career so far, Larry?
Yeah, so back to the culture, it was defining and operationalizing a culture that everyone talked about it every day. And even now, 4.5 years later, people are talking about what the culture is, what the values are, all hands meetings, recognition tools, how we interview, to make it really the center. I think everything we do in HR and then around the business is all connected. And a
Hmm.
lot of times we just build things in silos. But if the center of that connection is the culture and values that everyone understands and talks about, everything else amplifies and is at much larger magnitude and has a farther global reach. I mean,
Yep.
you just see it expand.
Oh, yeah.
And I would take that experience anywhere the rest of my life and try to, replicate it or duplicate it the best we could.
That's great. And that becomes your legacy, right? That's something you're leaving behind that's affecting the organization, all the people in it. People go on, it changes their careers. They go off and do other things. And it's all because of the culture you set up.
Yeah, it's super powerful. So I think working on talent development without having a defined culture or at least an engaging culture that's tied into that, you're just siloing things out. Everything's got to be one virtuous cycle.
Yeah, absolutely. So flip side of that, Larry, what's been your biggest mistake or failure in your career? And what did you learn from that?
I have two. One
Okay.
is I did what we said earlier. I built a training and said, ta-da, and I was like,
Yeah.
no, thank you. And the second one, I went to a company for the money.
Uh-huh.
And I didn't really talk about the business. I didn't really talk about the culture. I went in there just asking, what do you want me to do?
Yeah.
And that was my biggest aha of you went into this thing blind. And so that's why I give advice and I give myself advice of you really have to understand the culture. You really have to understand the business model before you make any decisions to go to a company.
Yeah. Practice what you preach, right?
Yeah, exactly.
That's awesome. You've got a lot of great things going on. You're still, I know, new and setting a lot of things up at NetApp. What's the biggest challenge for you today when it comes to talent development?
I think the biggest challenge is people are used to are used to what it was like.
Mm-hmm.
So give me some trainings, set up our focal review. So changing the mindset of we have to start thinking about the future of talent and how it aligns to the business and what are easy ways that we can get managers to believe in that. So changing that mindset, starting at the top is always the biggest challenge because it looks like a bigger lift than it actually is. And people say, why can't we just do it the way we always do it? Even though they'll say at the other side of their mouth, even though I hate how we do it.
Right.
So,
but people don't like change. Even if they want change, they don't like change.
Let's do it next year. We can do it one more year.
Yeah.
So getting the top to realize that there are better ways to do this, easier ways to do it, and unshackle the leadership, unshackle the managers, give them accountability and the tools, and I guarantee they rise to the occasion.
Yeah, absolutely. Makes sense. Are there any trends that you're following in talent development today?
Yeah, I mean, one thing that's really cool, being in HR for many years, is finally HR technology is catching up to the rest of the world. So we're looking at AI for the top of the funnel of talent acquisition, really great technology engagements of learning the business and learning how to make decisions. I think any new technology that speeds things up and makes it easier for managers to engage is great. And I think there's a lot more focus on bringing your whole self to work, the idea of wellness. Since the phone became such a big part of your life, you have a blended life, right? You're texting your wife and then your boss is texting you in the same 3 minutes. So how do you have people really think about their whole self and balancing their well-being?
Yeah, I was at a conference last year and I heard a CLO from an organization was talking about that. And he said, I'm not going to mess this up now, but he was talking about how, hey, we shop at work and we work from home. So why are we still trying to separate, the two when it's really more of a blended work life now?
It absolutely is. And I think even 5 years ago, businesses felt that was a soft way to look at talent.
Mm-hmm.
This whole idea of being healthy. And I've seen a rapid change in how do we really get employees to understand that we want you to be healthy. We want you to care about your work-life balance. And what are ways that we can help you achieve that? I think that's all going in the right direction.
Yeah. Well, I mean, I've read a lot about this and the science is very clear that when people have the opportunity to take breaks, when they sleep enough, when they exercise, they are more productive, right? You think that when you have a lot of work to do, we just need to push through and work a 60-hour week and sleep later. But when you actually take the time to rest, to take a break, to take care of your body and your health and eat right, you will be more productive. And that's why I'm so focused on those things for myself, because I also have a family and I don't want to work too much. And so I want to be highly productive with the amount of time that I have to work.
Right. It just makes sense, right?
Yeah.
We ignored it as business, but I think it just makes logical sense. Healthy people are just better at everything. So I think a big focus on that is imperative.
Yeah. Awesome. Are there any, so is there a book or a TED Talk that you often recommend or has made a big impact on you?
Yeah, one that hit me right at the right time when I was thinking about how do we make things simple it's called One Page Talent Management by Mark Efron. And it really was this idea of you can simplify talent management and really make it transparent. The two keys that I was talking about was transparency. Everyone should know what promotions look like. Everyone should know what the other talent and the other organizations are doing, and accountability. Really give managers the accountability to run their own show, run their own talent, and just surround them with easy to use tools to do that. So when I started reading that, it was right at the right time when I was planning it. So those two things came together.
Oh, that's really great. I've heard that book recommended a couple of times, and Mark Efron actually shared this podcast on LinkedIn the other day, so I might have to try to get him on.
Oh, yeah. Well, maybe he'll share this one since I just plugged his book, right?
I will have to tag him. Yeah, exactly. When we go live with this. Last question, Larry, for anybody listening who is looking for ways to accelerate their career in talent development, what's one more piece of advice that you would give?
I just think you have to, if you're going into HR nowadays, you have to realize that it's consultative and not mandatory. And we're not here to police. We're here to unleash talent and focus on what are the best possible ways to help everyone understand what a growth environment is, what a growth mindset is, and help people understand their future is intertwined with the future of the company. So solutions and not, sort of pushing people into a box.
Yeah, I like that. And I think that's a trend that I'm seeing now too, is that people are kind of realizing that, hey, what HR was born out of, human resources, was really about just controlling the people and the regulations of, where they need to be at what time. But really now it's more about people development. And you mentioned growth mindset, of course, referring to the book Mindset by Carol Dweck, one of my all-time favorite books. But it's about developing your people, not managing them as a resource, but really giving them the develop they need.
Yeah, we're enablers, right? You have to think of yourself as an enabler and a partner, and less of someone who's checking a box for people.
Yeah, fantastic. Well, Larry, this has been great. Thank you so much for coming on and taking the time to share some of your experience and your wisdom and your advice with us. I really appreciate it. And I know our listeners do as well. So thank you again for coming on the Talent Development Hot Seat.
Thank you. Thanks for inviting me. It was a great chat and good luck.
All right. Thanks.